The book hit the counter with a sound that felt louder than it should have. It was the kind of sound that turned heads. 34-year-old Ethan Miller froze the moment the librarian raised her eyebrows. For 3 seconds, just long enough for embarrassment to bloom, he wondered if his life had finally decided to announce itself out loud. The Cedar Falls Public Library was quiet in the specific way only American small-town libraries ever were, not silent, but respectfully alive. Pages whispered. A printer coughed in the distance. Somewhere near the children's section, a toddler laughed once and was immediately shushed with loving urgency. Outside, late October sunlight slanted through tall windows, warming the wooden floors while the air itself smelled faintly of rain, dust, and old paper. Ethan stood at the checkout desk wearing a faded green hoodie, jeans that had seen better years, and sneakers whose soles had gone thin at the heels. His hair, brown, stubborn, slightly too long, fell into his eyes because haircuts were something he kept postponing for reasons that always sounded logical until they weren't. His beard was uneven, more gave-up trimming than carefully styled. On the counter between him and Janice Caldwell, the senior librarian with steel gray hair and glasses on a beaded chain, sat a book that very clearly did not belong to him. The title glared up in bold red letters, How to Retire Rich Through Strategic Real Estate Investments. Janice tilted her head. Slowly, deliberately. Ethan swallowed. This isn't what it looks like, he said, immediately hating how guilty that sounded. Janice didn't smile. She didn't frown either. She simply adjusted her glasses and looked at him the way librarians look at people when they already know the truth but want to see if you'll lie anyway. Oh, she said. Ethan cleared his throat. I came in for a cookbook. That earned him a smile. Thin, amused, patient. You usually do, Janice said. Last week it was chili. Before that, slow cooker meals for one. The line behind him shifted. Someone coughed. The pressure of being seen pressed into Ethan's back like gravity. I must have grabbed the wrong book, he said. From the returns cart. Janice glanced down at the book again. Then she looked past Ethan's shoulder. That would be because, she said calmly, someone else grabbed yours. Ethan turned. And that's when he saw Claire Bennett. She stood a few feet behind him, holding a bright yellow cookbook titled 5-Ingredient Comfort Meals. She was about his age, maybe early 30s, wearing a navy coat buttoned crookedly, a knit scarf wrapped twice around her neck like she'd rushed out the door. Her hair, dark blonde, pulled into a loose bun, had escaped in soft strands around her face. She wore round glasses, slightly fogged from coming in out of the cold, and her expression hovered somewhere between apology and laughter. For a half second, neither of them spoke. Then Claire lifted the cookbook slightly. I think, she said, smiling despite herself, we swapped futures. The line laughed. Ethan felt heat rush to his ears. He laughed too, short, surprised, real. Yeah, he said, that tracks. Janice slid both books toward the center of the counter. Happens more than you'd think, she said. People reach for what they think they need. Sometimes they grab what they want. Occasionally, they grab what scares them. Claire met Ethan's eyes. Something passed between him, recognition, maybe, or relief at not being alone in the awkwardness. I'm Claire, she said, stepping forward. And I promise I'm not planning to retire rich anytime soon. Ethan took the cookbook from her. Their fingers brushed. Electricity, small but undeniable, ran through him. Ethan, he said, and I'm definitely not planning to invest in real estate. Janice stamped the books with practiced precision. Life, she said, sliding the cards back, has a funny way of handing us the wrong chapters at the right time. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows. Leaves scraped across the sidewalk like punctuation marks. Ethan stepped aside so Claire could check out, but neither of them moved immediately. The moment stretched, gentle, unforced. You want to? Claire started, then stopped, smiling. This is weird. Extremely, Ethan agreed. But, she continued, there's a coffee shop across the street. And I feel like we should probably talk about the futures we accidentally picked up. Ethan glanced down at the cookbook in his hands. Then back at her. For the first time in a long while, something didn't feel heavy. Yeah, he said, I'd like that. Outside, Cedar Falls moved along, parents, retirees, teenagers, the steady rhythm of a town that believed in routine. Inside, two strangers stepped out of line. And scene one had only just begun. The first sound Daniel Mercer heard that morning was the hollow thud of a book dropping onto a hardwood floor. It echoed louder than it should have. In that instant, before coffee, before purpose, before optimism, the sound felt like a verdict. Daniel froze in the Cedar Falls Public Library aisle, shoulders tight inside a faded navy jacket that still smelled faintly of winter laundry detergent. Outside, early spring rain streaked down the tall front windows, blurring the American flags on Main Street and turning parked pickup trucks into smeared watercolor shapes. Inside, the library hummed with its usual quiet ritual. The soft wheeze of the HVAC, pages turning, a child whisper laughing too loud before being gently shushed. The book at Daniel's feet wasn't his. That mattered more than it should have. He stared down at the cover, Introduction to Small Business Accounting, 4th edition, while his own intended choice, a dog-eared copy of Midwestern Home Gardening, rested safely under his arm. Somewhere behind him, a throat cleared. Not angrily, not kindly, just enough to announce another human being now involved in his mistake. This was how Daniel's life had felt lately. One small, harmless mix-up at a time, stacking quietly into something heavier. 3 months earlier, he'd been laid off from the regional printing plant after 14 years. Not fired, laid off, the polite American word that still punched just as hard. The company picnic photos still hung in his hallway at home, frozen smiles from better years. Since then, mornings had lost their urgency. Job applications blurred together, rejection emails arrived with algorithmic sympathy. And now, somehow, even the library felt like it was judging him. Sorry, Daniel muttered, bending down too quickly, knocking his elbow into the shelf with a dull thunk. He winced, the sound too loud again, too public. He grabbed the wrong book, then the right one, then hesitated, unsure which mistake to correct first. A laugh slipped out behind him. Not mocking, not cruel. Warm. It's okay, a woman said. That shelf attacks everyone eventually. Daniel turned. Emily Carter stood there holding a canvas tote bag with a stitched quote about books and courage. She wore a rust-colored sweater layered over a white tee, dark jeans cuffed just above worn ankle boots. Her hair, brown, shoulder-length, was pulled into a loose knot that suggested effort without obsession. She looked like someone who belonged in libraries. Like someone who still believed places like this mattered. I've lost 3 battles with that aisle, she added. It always wins. Daniel smiled before he could stop himself. It felt unfamiliar. Guess I walked into it unprepared, he said, glancing at the accounting textbook in his hands. Emily raised an eyebrow. Gardening to accounting is a bold pivot. He laughed, a short burst that surprised him. Yeah, I think the books are trying to tell me something. Or setting you up, she said. Libraries love unexpected plot twists. They stood there for a moment, 2 strangers suspended between shelves labeled personal finance and home hobby, while rain tapped insistently against the windows. Somewhere nearby, Harold Bennett, the retired history teacher who volunteered 3 days a week, rolled a cart of returns, nodding knowingly as if he'd seen this exact scene unfold 100 times. Daniel cleared his throat. Daniel, by the way. Emily, she said, nice to meet you via minor academic crisis. They exchanged the accounting book for the gardening guide, correcting the universe in the smallest possible way. And yet, something had shifted. Daniel didn't notice it immediately. He wouldn't until much later. But the air felt different, like the moment right after a storm breaks but before the sun fully commits. They ended up at the same long oak table near the windows, a silent agreement neither of them acknowledged. Emily spread out a stack of novels, contemporary fiction, a memoir with sticky notes peeking out. Daniel set his book down carefully, as if it might run away again. You live around here? She asked quietly. Yeah, whole life, Daniel said. Cedar Falls doesn't let go easily. She smiled. That's true, I moved back last year. After Chicago. Big change, he said. Big burnout, she corrected gently. They shared another laugh, softer this time, the kind that didn't need volume. Minutes passed. Pages turned. Rain slowed. Daniel tried to read about compost ratios but found himself distracted, not by Emily exactly, but by the feeling of being normal again. Not a problem to solve. Not a resume to revise. Just a man sitting in a library on a weekday morning, surrounded by stories. Across the room, a teenage boy argued in whispers with his grandmother about graphic novels. A middle-aged couple compared travel guides like they were planning an escape. The library breathed with community, with quiet resilience. Emily glanced up. So, she said, what's the garden for? Daniel hesitated, then shrugged. Something to grow. Feels like I need proof things still do that. She nodded, understanding without prying. That's fair. Silence settled again, comfortable this time. When Daniel finally stood to leave, hours later than planned, he felt lighter, though nothing in his life had technically changed. No job offer, no miracle solution, just a book he hadn't intended to pick up, and a conversation he hadn't known he needed. At the checkout desk, Harold scanned Daniel's gardening book and smiled. "Funny how the wrong book usually leads to the right one," he said. Daniel paused. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. He stepped onto Main Street with a borrowed story under his arm and a quiet realization settling in. Sometimes, progress doesn't arrive as a breakthrough. Sometimes, it arrives as a mix-up. And sometimes, that's enough to change the direction of a day, or a life. The following Saturday morning arrived with a clarity that felt earned. Spring had finally committed to Cedar Falls, not tentatively but with confidence. Blue skies stretched clean and uninterrupted, the kind of Midwestern sky that made people believe in fresh starts whether they meant to or not. Daniel Mercer woke earlier than usual, sunlight cutting through the blinds of his modest two-bedroom rental on Willow Street. The house was nothing remarkable. Beige siding, narrow porch, a lawn that tried its best. But that morning, it felt like a place that belonged to him again. He brewed coffee in the old drip machine he'd owned since his 20s, the gurgling sound filling the kitchen like a familiar voice. On the small table by the window lay the gardening book, its spine already bent from use. He'd spent the week reading it slowly, deliberately, the way he used to read novels before adulthood taught him to rush. Each chapter felt less about soil and more about patience, preparation, timing, resilience. Growth wasn't forced, it was allowed. Daniel stepped outside, coffee mug warming his hands, and surveyed the narrow strip of dirt behind the house. The yard wasn't impressive. Patchy grass, stubborn weeds, remnants of last fall's neglect. Still, he smiled. Something could happen here. Across the street, Mrs. Lillian Rowe was already outside, kneeling beside her rose bushes in a wide-brimmed hat. She looked up and waved. "Morning, Daniel. Looks like planting weather." "Guess so," he replied. "Though I'm learning as I go." She chuckled. "That's how everyone does it. Anyone who says otherwise is lying." He liked that. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself back at the library, not out of necessity, but habit forming into choice. The place buzzed more than it had during the weekday lull. Families, students, retirees, all sharing space without needing to explain why. It felt democratic in the best American sense. Emily Carter sat at the same oak table, hair down this time, sunlight catching in it as she read. She looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Back already?" she asked. "Guess the wrong book really stuck," Daniel said. "Figured I'd see what other accidents I could make." She laughed. "Careful, you might end up with a whole new life." They talked more easily now, the stiffness of first meetings gone. Emily told him about her work, freelance editing, mostly remote, the kind of job that looked flexible but demanded constant reinvention. Daniel shared more honestly than he expected about the layoff, the quiet fear that followed, the sense of being paused while everyone else kept moving. Emily listened without fixing him. That mattered. At the next table, Harold Bennett leaned over to interject. "You know," he said, adjusting his glasses, "most people think libraries are about finding information. Really, they're about finding yourself when you least expect it." Emily grinned. "Is that from a book?" "No," Harold said. "It's from watching people for 40 years. The afternoon drifted by. Laughter surfaced and receded. Outside, kids rode bikes along Main Street, their voices drifting through open windows. Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle in, not happiness exactly, but alignment. Like standing in the right chapter. Over the next few weeks, small things compounded. Daniel planted the garden. Tomatoes, herbs, a few ambitious sunflowers. He messed up spacing, overwatered, learned. Each morning became purposeful, each failure educational instead of personal. Emily began stopping by on her evening walks, offering commentary, encouragement, occasional sarcasm. They shared meals on the porch, traded book recommendations, talked about dreams without pretending they had timelines. The town noticed. At the library's monthly community night, Daniel volunteered to help set up chairs. Then to speak, briefly, about gardening books for beginners. His voice shook at first, but steadied when he saw familiar faces nodding along. Harold clapped the loudest. Opportunity arrived quietly, as it often does. A local nonprofit needed someone to manage printing and outreach for their programs, part-time at first. Someone mentioned Daniel, someone else remembered his reliability. He interviewed in borrowed confidence and honest words. He got the job. It wasn't everything, but it was something, and something was enough to grow from. One evening, months later, Daniel and Emily sat on the porch watching the sunset behind the houses. The garden flourished beside them, green and unapologetic. Funny, Daniel said. If I hadn't picked up the wrong book. Emily smiled. You might still be waiting for the right one. He nodded. Turns out, life doesn't always hand you the story you expect. She raised her glass. But sometimes, it hands you the one you need. The narrator would say this is where the lesson lives. Not in the library, or the book, or even the chance encounter, but in the willingness to stay open when things go slightly wrong. Because mistakes aren't detours. They're invitations. And if you accept them with humor, patience, and a little courage, they might just rewrite your ending.
Daily happiness and motivation is hidden in. Like and subscribe.